It happens more often than most people think. Custody exchanges, intended to be moments of transition and cooperation between separated parents, sometimes become war zones. According to the Center for Judicial Excellence, more than 800 children have been murdered by a parent during custody disputes since 2008. And many of these tragedies unfold not in secret, not in the shadows, but in plain sight, in parking lots, courthouses, and front yards, sometimes even in the presence of innocent, helpless children. This is Crimebot Chronicles, and you're about to hear a story that's going to stay with you. If you're new here, make sure to subscribe, like, share, and drop your thoughts in the comments, because these stories aren't just entertainment. They're warnings. They're wake-up calls. And sometimes, they're the only way the truth survives. It was an ordinary afternoon. The sun hung low in the sky, kids laughed in a nearby park, and a white SUV pulled into a suburban driveway. Inside that car sat a man, a father, carrying the weight of a fractured family and the determination to be present for his children. He stepped out, heart pounding like it always did during these exchanges. His ex-wife stood on the porch, arms crossed. Their children, just a few feet away, clutching backpacks, sensing tension without understanding it. And then, in an instant, everything unraveled. What happened that day? Why did it escalate to murder? And who, if anyone, is to blame beyond the man who pulled the trigger? Let's rewind. Before the bitterness, before the court hearings and protective orders, there was love. Mark and Rachel met during their college years. He was a business major, practical and driven. She was studying psychology, artistic and emotionally intuitive. Their early relationship was full of passion, shared dreams, and an almost obsessive connection. Friends would describe them as magnetic, always together, inseparable. But as the years passed, the cracks began to form. Mark became more focused on his career, often working late, climbing the corporate ladder. Rachel, feeling emotionally neglected, turned inward. The couple began to argue, first about small things, then about everything. Rachel said she felt unheard. Mark felt constantly criticized. They sought therapy but never fully committed to the process. And when the kids came, the divide grew wider. Rachel began to accuse Mark of being emotionally distant. He accused her of being overly controlling. Their communication deteriorated to the point where even scheduling a pediatrician appointment could spark a fight. Yet, for a time, they stayed together for the kids. Until they couldn't anymore. According to Dr. James Ferris, a relationship psychologist, what happened to Mark and Rachel mirrors patterns seen in many high-conflict divorces. You have two people whose identities were once interwoven. When separation occurs, it's not just about logistics, it's about survival. Emotional, psychological, and even social survival. Each party is scrambling to reclaim control. And when kids are involved, that battle becomes even more emotionally fraught. The divorce was drawn out and combative. Rachel sought full custody. Mark pushed for joint custody. The court, believing in the benefit of both parents being involved, granted shared custody with strict guidelines. But resentment brewed beneath the surface. And despite court orders, tension dominated every interaction. Custody disputes are some of the most emotionally charged legal battles a person can endure. Love, resentment, fear, and loss collide in family courtrooms every day. While the intention is to find what's best for the children, the reality is often far messier. These conflicts rarely end when the ink dries on the court documents. Instead, bitterness lingers, and sometimes it boils over. Experts in family law have long warned that custody exchanges, those brief, unavoidable face-to-face interactions between exes, can be volatile hotspots, especially in high-conflict divorces. In this case, the red flags had been waving for months. Mark was described by friends and family as a devoted parent. He'd fought tooth and nail for joint custody after the divorce. He showed up for school plays, soccer games, parent-teacher meetings. He wasn't perfect, no one is, but he was trying to be a good dad, trying to keep the peace. But it wasn't easy. Rachel claimed he was manipulative and controlling. She accused him of emotional abuse, of using the children to hurt her. Mark denied it all. He said she was turning the kids against him, manipulating their time together, making excuses to withhold visitation. Their relationship, once marked by affection and dreams of a shared future, had soured into something dark and volatile. There were police reports, calls made during previous exchanges, allegations of threats, arguments that nearly turned physical. But each time, authorities documented the incident, maybe issued a warning, and moved on. The courts adjusted pickup times, changed locations, but nothing truly stopped the storm from building. You are watching Crimebot Chronicles. If you've made it this far, you're clearly just as invested in getting to the truth as we are. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and tap the notification bell so you never miss a case. If this story got you thinking, drop a comment below. We read every comment. And if you found this video compelling, give it a like and share it with someone who follows true crime as closely as you do. Let's keep the conversation going. On the day of the incident, Rachel had asked her new boyfriend, Daniel, to accompany her during the custody exchange. Daniel wasn't just a passive presence in her life. He was fiercely protective of her, convinced that Mark posed a threat. Mark, on the other hand, viewed Daniel as an interloper, someone who was trying to replace him in his children's lives. The animosity between the two men had been growing. Mutual distrust, fueled by weeks of escalating texts, veiled threats, and tense confrontations. That day, Daniel arrived early and stood on the porch beside Rachel. Mark pulled up exactly on time. He stepped out, his kids already reaching for the door. That's when the shouting started. It was fast, ugly, chaotic. Words flew like daggers. Rachel yelling, Mark yelling back. The kids frozen in fear. Then Daniel stepped forward, chest puffed, hand on his waistband. Witnesses said he told Mark to back off, that he made a move. Mark took a step toward his children, just one step, and Daniel drew a gun. The first shot hit Mark in the shoulder. He staggered. The second shot pierced his chest. The third missed, shattering the window of his car. Mark collapsed beside the vehicle, eyes wide in disbelief. His children screamed. Neighbors ran. And Rachel? She stood there, trembling, her face pale, her hands shaking. Police arrived within minutes. Daniel didn't flee. He stood there, hands raised, still holding the weapon, claiming self-defense. He told the officers that Mark had threatened him, that he feared for Rachel's safety, that he had no choice. But the witnesses, 3 neighbors and 1 terrified child, told a different story. They said Mark never raised a hand, never reached for a weapon, that he was trying to talk, to reason, to protect his children. The DA reviewed the evidence and filed charges: second-degree murder, unlawful use of a firearm, child endangerment. The trial would become a media circus. Daniel's defense attorney painted Mark as aggressive, volatile, a man who used his size and presence to intimidate. The prosecution countered with surveillance footage from a neighbor's Ring camera. Audio caught the final moments, the shouts, the gunfire, the screams. There was no indication that Mark ever attacked. And then there were the children. One of the most painful elements of this tragedy was their trauma. Forced to testify. Forced to relive that day again and again. In therapy sessions. In court. In nightmares. Experts testified that witnessing such violence can lead to lifelong psychological damage. PTSD, anxiety, trust issues. One therapist said the children would likely carry that moment with them into adulthood. A split second of violence that became a permanent scar. Dr. Linda Myers, a clinical psychologist specializing in high-conflict divorces, explained that children in these situations often become emotional hostages. They internalize the chaos. Even if the violence isn't directed at them, they feel responsible. They feel unsafe. It alters their perception of the world and of love. What makes this story so unbearable is how preventable it was. There had been warning signs, red flags, reports, pleas, yet nothing substantial had been done. The custody exchange continued to happen in unsupervised locations, with no security, no neutral observers. And no one stopped to ask, what if something goes wrong? Legal expert and family law attorney Carla Jennings weighed in on the systemic failures. Courts are overwhelmed. Judges have to process dozens of custody motions a day. And too often, they assume the parties will behave civilly. But we know that's not always the case. Supervised exchanges cost money. Security details require resources. And those gaps in the system create space for violence. The justice system often struggles to adapt to the emotional complexity of family disputes. It's not just about legal rights, it's about people, their past, their pain, their triggers. And in some cases, it's about people who believe that violence is the only way to assert control. Daniel said he felt threatened, but a gun was his answer? In front of children? It raises chilling questions. What happens when a new partner becomes a protector? When love mixes with fear and escalates into paranoia? Daniel claimed to be defending Rachel, but Rachel herself never testified that she was in danger that day. She mourned Mark's death. She didn't defend Daniel. She wept on the stand, held her children close, and said she never wanted any of this to happen. Psychologists call this reactive violence. The perceived threat, real or imagined, sparking an irrational, disproportionate response. It often happens when emotional boundaries are blurred, when old wounds are reopened, when someone feels powerless and decides to reclaim that power with force. That's what Daniel did. He wasn't protecting anyone. He was asserting control, making a point, and in doing so, he robbed 2 children of their father.